Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Need Network and Women Moving Millions, for organizing this session to expand knowledge in the philanthropic sector on an incredibly important work that happens in the intersection of gender justice and environmental justice. Ina, Karen, Jessica, and your teams, it's a pleasure to participate in this event with your networks. And thank you for bringing me here today. I'm Laura Garcia. I'm the CEO and President of Global Greengrants Fund. And I'm here with two colleagues who hopefully we're going to engage in a conversation that will be very valuable for you in your work as funders as well. In times like this, as funders, we have the responsibility always to choose possibility over unresponsiveness. We know that climate change does not impact everyone equally, and women have less access than men to power, resources, information, decision-making, and technology, to just name a few. But women are not simply just victims of this reality. They are also local change agents leading climate action, reimagining what's possible, and implementing gender justice climate initiatives. However, only less than 0.1% of institutional philanthropy is being directed to women's climate action. This is a huge missed opportunity for funders committed to a healthy environment and an equitable world. It can be challenging as a funder to understand how exactly to bridge this funding gap in a meaningful way that is impactful and locally driven. But hopefully, conversations like this one today will help us shift those numbers more. I work in Global Greengrants Fund, an organization that has been committed to to funding women's environmental action. After years of intentional work to support women's environmental defenders, we have been allocating, for a few years now, half of our total grant making to environmental groups working at the intersection of gender and the environment. We work across 168 countries and are one of the world's top funders in terms of redistribution of resources to grassroots social justice organizations. And I'm here today to say this because it is very possible that many other funders join us in this commitment. In our chat right now, you may find some publications that we have developed with our women's funds partners and Prospera, the international network of women's funds. These publications can also help you guide as donors in support for grassroots women's action. So please feel free to use these publications afterwards and in our conversation today. But let me introduce the panel now. We're very fortunate to have join us today Maria Alejandra Escalante and Pratima Gurung, two change makers in Global Greengrants Global Network, whose leadership and activism helps illustrate how critical it is to resource gender-just climate initiatives and why intermediaries play such a critical role in doing so. Welcome, Maria Alejandra and Pratima. I'm very excited to be speaking with you today. And I've been really looking forward to this conversation for a while. But before we begin, could you please share a little bit about yourselves? Maybe Maria Alejandra, you can start.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. And Laura, thank you for the introduction. Just to say a little bit about myself, I am a queer feminist activist, organizer, researcher. I change hats every now and then. I'm from Colombia. I'm normally based in Colombia, and this is where I've gotten my political education, most of all. I have been part of the climate justice movement for a decade or so now, doing work with other young activists, but also Global South coalitions in different spaces, like the UN climate negotiations, and also working more locally to strive for different ways in which we can approach climate justice from a southern-based perspective, especially in the Andes region. And I have recently started working in the philanthropic sector. I joined FRIDA, the Young Feminist Fund, a few years ago and led the climate and environmental justice advocacy program there. And I am, bless you, and I am right now leading a new initiative a collaboration amongst different funders, and hopefully we get to speak more about that. Thank you for that introduction.
Pratima?
Thank you. Good morning, I would say from here, and very, very honored to be in this discussion. Thank you for my introduction, Laura, and I would like to also acknowledge the Global Greengrants Fund for providing me this opportunity to have the rich conversation with all of you. So I am Pratima Gurung from Nepal. So as Maria has explained, I also have different hats. As an activist, as an intersectional activist, I work in the academia and also do my activism at the grassroots to the international level. I work primarily on young indigenous women with disabilities, looking at the intersections of gender, disability, indigeneity, and again, framing these three critical identities into the climate justice initiatives. So it has really been a passion for me, looking at the grassroots organizations and our multiple marginalized voices from the ground who are really not able to bring the voices in the entire global discussion. And when it comes to the climate justice initiatives and the philanthropic world, we as a group who have multiple marginalized identity, I think we are not still yet in this conversation. So it's very much critical for us to have in this conversation when we are demanding about the structural changes within ourselves. So the structural changes is also about leading our voice, making ourselves on the table where we make decisions on the lives that impact to us as a indigenous women with disability from the very global South framework. So very much honored to be here and have a discussion with all of you to share my grassroots experiences. Thank you.
This is great, Pratima. Thank you so much. Let me turn it now to Maria Alejandra for our first question. Maria Alejandra, we have all heard of Greta Thunberg by now and her leadership in climate activism, but thousands of young feminists are leading grassroots climate action every day all over the world that most of us are not aware of. Your background working with young feminists and climate movements provides you with a unique insight into this activism that you bring as an advisor to Global Greengrants Fund. Can you provide examples of this type of activism and why funding through intermediaries such as FRIDA, for example, or Global Greengrants is so critical to ensuring their ongoing work?
Yeah, thank you for those questions. In my experience, both climate and feminist movements, especially and particularly those stemming from Southern-based perspectives, have always been working from a place of collective power building, which is different from creating individual activists in like stars. I think it's interesting that you bring the example of Greta Thunberg as right now, because I wonder if we could say that Greta or the movement that has sparked the Fridays for Future movement has sparked after her leadership is a feminist movement. And I would love to have that conversation at some point, because I would say that feminist climate justice movements in the South have a quality of analysis of reading the current context based on a systemic analysis, a systemic understanding of why the current climate and environmental crisis and other multidimensional crises that we're facing, like the health, housing, racial crises, are all interlinked. I would say that for feminist climate justice movements and youth in particular, it is clear that the work on climate justice is just not about lowering carbon emissions at this point, but making sure that while we do that, there are all the other sources of violence get also transformed. And I think I'm talking here about being very aware that we need to transform the economies of free market and liberalization into economies of regeneration, needing to transform the systems that put profit before people. For example, transforming a world that is patriarchal, racist, unequal, and all of these big transformations are rooted in ideas of equity and justice. And to me, that is what feminist climate justice youth are doing right now. And we can see that, and you asked me for examples, we can see those in different areas, in different regions by, for example, the whole movement in Lamu in Kenya, right? That was primarily led by women and young people, and that eventually were able to kick out a huge coal power plant out of their territory. We can also see feminist youth at the front line of agroecological movements in Colombia, where I'm from. And there are many different examples of how youth are understanding that by shifting the power inequities in certain aspects, for example, access to land, access to water, access to education, access to political decision-making spaces in feminist ways, is also contributing to alleviating the climate crisis in some way. So I would say that young feminist climate movements are already working from an intersectional point of view. In philanthropy, obviously, we talk so much about intersectionality and what that means. And I think for me, it means that there is a capacity to tackle and understand that the society that we live in is absolutely interconnected, and the results of what we're seeing right now with the multiple crises is a result of a history of colonial power, of capitalist settlement, and neoliberal markets that are just driving inequities all over. And you asked me about intermediaries and the role of a fund like Frida, the Young Feminist Fund, or Global Greengrants. And these, to me, these intermediaries have been crucial to decentralize decision-making power and resources from foundations or from individuals that are removed from the context, the struggles, because of their privileges. And so I see the work that GGF or Frida are doing in two different ways. One is to advocate and position the people who have been historically at the margins of power into the decision-making spaces via their staff, their advisory, and of course the grantee partners. And another way in which GGF or Frida are doing this work is by researching movements in the ways that movements need, right? With the flexibility, with the core grants, with sustained relationships that we've heard over and over and over that that's what movements primarily need, right? And by virtue of being intermediaries, GGF, Frida, and others can fund smaller initiatives that have never been seen or funded by other larger foundations. And there's more space to build trust amongst the funders, the donors, the intermediaries, and the movements themselves, requiring less paperwork, requiring less bending from movements to adopt a donor mindset. And I think that especially GGF and especially Frida in these cases are doing much more than just mobilizing financial resources, but are really trying to stand by with movements in ways that are different from traditional philanthropy, and in also ways that still need to be shifted and need to be even more improved.
Thank you so much, Maria Alejandra. And I think that you touched on two very important things. And I would just quickly say that on these intersections and intersectional work, we have recently finished a 5-year evaluation on our work with gender justice and the environment, as you may know already, in Greengrants. And one of the biggest findings for us was that by committing more funding to women-led organizations, we were actually beginning to work a lot more on different intersections, precisely because of what you said, which is that for many young climate feminist activists, for example, they are working deeper and deeper on these intersections and trying to address other inequalities at the same time. So in many ways, what I say is like a total winning strategy for any funder is to start working on women and gender justice and in the intersection of environmental justice as a way also to promote further intersectional work. And bridging the gap between money and movements that you're mentioning is incredibly important. And speaking about that, we're bringing Pratima here today with us. And she, as at the National Indigenous Disabled Women's Association Nepal, Pratima, I would like to ask you, you do a lot of awareness raising about these intersections that I was just talking about of indigenous women and girls with disabilities and climate change. But for those who are with us today, can you share specific challenges that indigenous women and girls with disabilities face? And can you give us an example or two about how they are leading the way towards climate justice, please?
Thank you, Laura, for the question again. And as you have already explained, we work at the very grassroots level, and my conversation will be those voiceless voices reflecting over here in a very, very simple manner, so that the funders understands the challenges about what we really face at the grassroots level and bring those perspectives. So for us, if you look at the indigenous women with disabilities globally, we are near about 54 million indigenous people with disabilities and 28 million indigenous women with disabilities who have multiple marginalized and intersecting identities. And when these multiple marginalized intersecting identities are exacerbated within different layers of social, economic, political, environmental, and different other forms of the aspects of the society, we realize the compounded form of intersectional identities that an individual holds is not often realized. It is not often, they have different kind of experience, but they are not able to bring those lens of the intersectionality. And this is where I just want to frame the national policies. We have been discussing and debating a lot within the feminist movement, within the environmental movement, within the disability movement or indigenous movement. But still, I would say, as a grassroots activist, we are still at the grassroots level, we are still looking these different lenses and perspectives in a very silos, I would say. It's not been a very much integrated way when it comes to the grassroots level. That means these are being reflected not only within our lived experience, but also at the structural level when I talk about the policies and provisions. If you look at Nepal, we are 40% indigenous people, which has 123 languages with 125 ethnic communities. It is such a diversity. And our country has accepted the multilingual, the multi religion, the multi diversity of all these perspectives. But when it comes to the policy, we still have the policy is in a single linear approach. So it only just says as a woman. So it says women is a homogeneous group, not a heterogeneous group. So if it is talking about disability, so it looks person with disabilities, not as a women with disabilities, or within the women with disabilities, it does not understand and realize indigenous women with disabilities. So what I mean to say that there is an understanding of the intersectionality within the feminist movement, but this has to be yet realized at the grassroots level, in the policies and in the structure on the one hand. On the other hand, I also see that there is also the differences within the funders. I have been facing many times the challenges with the funders, because most of the funders, they have their mindset that, okay, we're going to support and fund for the feminist, groups. So when they see the feminist groups, they entirely fund on women. They do not go that what are the needs and priority as a woman with disabilities that we require. For example, the very precondition for us as a women with disabilities would be the accessibility needs. If I'm an indigenous woman, the language becomes the first precondition for me. So we still find that the funders are committed very, very openly supporting and engaging in the intersectional framework, but that has yet to be internalized when it comes to the practice. So as indigenous women with disabilities working in the grassroots level, I would say that there are many challenges within us. So if you look at our perspectives, and our lived experiences, even the lens of intersectionality, even in the documents, how we are being multiple times marginalized, those are unreported, those are undocumented, and most often we realize that we are invisible in all these discussions. And this is where the organization that I'm engaged has done our research on the climate justice, looking from an intersectional approach. And one of the challenges that the study has find out is about the multiple identities barriers. The policymakers and even the right holders, they are not able to understand, internalize the multiple identities, but at the same time, they also face the programmatic interventions. They also face the institutional barriers. And when I say institutional barriers, these institutional barriers are related with the civil society themselves, but also the state-led structures. They also face the psychosocial and environmental barriers in their day-to-day life. And there is also a lack of awareness about the impact of climate change in their daily lives when it comes to the most marginalized groups. So they have been resilient. They are coping these challenges with local strategies that they have. Just to give you an example, there is a study done by the World Food Program in Nepal, and that has been conducted in 2 provinces of Nepal. And one of the issues that the study has highlighted is about the food scarcity due to the climate change on indigenous women with disabilities. And if you look at these challenges, we have also asked them what are the coping strategies that you have done in your daily life. So they have been using the traditional food system, mixing the flour and mixing water to cope up with their empty stomach. They have also tried the skipping of the food in their day-to-day routine lives. So these critical examples shows that there is still an effort for having and understanding this lens at the grassroots level. But at the same time, we also see that the initiatives that the organization like us we have been doing at the grassroots level and gathering those lived experience are yet to be again debated at the global level, are yet to be framed in a way that it should be framed. So I think there is a huge need of having a rich and collective conversation among us to understand our lived experience, because every lived experience of an individual with their multiple identities varies and it is distinct. So it's for us, when we say about leaving no one behind, there is a huge, effort. What does it mean like? Because we realize that for 20 years, we were left behind. We were not in the rooms. We were not in the tables. And right now we want to enter into the table. We want to enter into the rooms telling that these are our distinct identities and these are our distinct multiple intersecting identities. And when we say multiple intersecting identities, these are the critical preconditions that need to be addressed, but from the very initiatives level. Thank you.
Thank you, Pratima. What you were saying right now, is that part of your call to action? Because I know that NID1, your organization, has a call to action called Leave No Indigenous Women and Girls with Disabilities Behind Climate Action. But can you tell us a little bit more about that in case you missed something?
Yeah, thank you, Laura. Because if you look at the UNFCCC framework, we have the Indigenous Peoples Constituency, the Youth Constituency, the Women Constituency. But we hardly find within this constituency and debate, the disability inclusion is not a part of the discussion. And this is where we see that we are still leaving behind. Even the UNFCCC framework does not have a disability constituency in a standalone position. So we are, as an indigenous women with disabilities, we are demanding for having this disability constituency, but at the same time, within the disability constituency, how the disability constituency frames the gender perspectives, frames the indigenous perspectives, and also bring the other marginalized voices. So for us, beginning from the COP15, having the word like person with disabilities within the Paris Agreement, having indigenous peoples and women among the Paris Agreement. It has been a long journey for us, a long struggle within ourselves. So I would say, I myself representing from those groups, I would say the struggle for us is within our movements, and we are also demanding our rights beyond the movement. So how do we bring this understanding, the lens within and beyond this movement? Is we're trying to bring this call to action from an intersectional lens. So just framing indigenous women with disabilities is just a symbolic, representation. So that would really bring other groups into this discussion. Because if you look at the whole climate change negotiation, and we still find that there is a huge gap of discussing about the queer and LGBTIQ communities, which is a missing agenda. I see. If you look at from the disability perspective, we see the same kind of things. We know that if you look at the entire feminist perspectives and feminist discussion, we have those intersectionality lens. But when it comes to the duty bearers, the duty bearers hardly understands about intersectionality, or they do understand about intersectionality, but they pose the question that no, we cannot go for all these different groups because it requires huge amount of money, investment, though we are talking in an equitable manner. But these are the kind of challenges that we have been facing at the grassroots level. So the call to action that we did at the COP27 was about the meaningful participation of indigenous women with disabilities, and also other marginalized groups in the strategic decision making. And that includes different kinds of planning to implementation and policies. We have also discussed, as an indigenous women, we have faced the challenges related with the free, prior, and informed consent, which is a precondition as an indigenous people. So we have also demanded that the free, prior, and informed consent has to be emphasized in a very holistic perspective. We also demanded for the criminalization of indigenous women and indigenous peoples, and also indigenous women with disabilities relating with the natural resources, land, territories that exist in our country. We have also demanded about, there is a commitment from the donors about $1.7 billion for indigenous people for the mitigation and and implementation of the climate change agreement, but that has not been implemented at the ground. We do not see any kind of changes on those things. And we also have demanded about the intersectional approach. And when we say about the intersectional approach, what are the preconditions that we require that is from an intersectional lens, and that is also related with the access to climate funds, building capacity, enhancing capacity of the grassroots organizations, ensuring the safe and conducive environment is built everywhere so that people can express about their lived experience, and they can also capacitate themselves into climate champions at all the levels. So these were the demands that we have discussed. We also discussed about the accessible programs and initiatives in the whole climate justice initiatives for persons with disabilities, from the local to the global level. And when it comes to the discussion about the loss and damage, we also want to say that who are the most vulnerable and marginalized group? How do we reach them? What are the strategies? When we say about loss and damage, we as the person with disabilities are on the front line. So how do we address that? So those are the demands that we have put forward for the call to action. And this is a very new initiatives, and we want all the multiple intersecting identities to join this conversation, so that there will be more rich conversation related to those voiceless voices who is yet to come to this conversation. And I hope this call to action will open an avenues for us to create an enabling space, a safe space where we can express our own lived experience and realities that we have been facing at the grassroots level. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Pratima, for sharing this important call to action. And I think that these are the spaces where we can actually promote this type of call to actions and raise visibility on what is not yet visible to to the philanthropic sector, but also to many governments, like you were mentioning. Let me turn it now to Maria Alejandra, but under a similar vein or thread, and let me just introduce you to the question that I'm going to be asking you, Maria Alejandra, to the audience. In 2019, Global Greengrants, Prospera, the Ford Foundation, and the MacArthur Foundation invited 25 other funders to join a peer-led group to learn more about the environmental and gender justice intersections. And through monthly calls and meetings, we created the Funder Learning Community for Women and the Environment, the FLC, what we call. And it has been a very supportive space so far for funders to build allyship, deep relationships, and collective development strategies, for example, for funding gender just climate solutions, and advocate for change within their own institutions, as well as the wider philanthropic sector. And this community is now beginning to transform itself into a funder learning action co-laboratory, which is a collaborative between funders and grassroots activists that will support gender and climate and environmental movements. So Maria Alejandra, you were recently hired as the chief co-creator of this Funder Learning Action co-laboratory. Can you tell us a bit more how it and why it came about? And how is this different from a traditional, from traditional philanthropy, and what is needed there?
Yeah, thank you. And also thank you, Pratima, for building such a strong case about what is it that philanthropists need to pay attention to. And to respond to your question, Laura, this Funder Learning Action Collaboratory, the FLAC, is actually giving me hope, quite a lot of hope. It's one of the most hopeful things that I've seen in philanthropy thus far, because I think for over the past years, in this community, we've grappled with all the complexities and all the urgency to respond to the global climate crisis. And we've reached a point where it's very evident that to tackle the climate crisis in intersectional, rooted ways is also a call for philanthropy to do differently, to do funding differently. And I mean, we've heard Pratima advocate for that difference already. And we've seen in this community that working from silos, and either geographic or disciplinary silos, has not led to movements being stronger and actually tackling the climate crisis in effective ways over the past 20, 30, 40 years. If anything, we might be losing the battle here. So this funder community is really responding to that urgency based on the fact that, I mean, the climate crisis has a small window of action, and we all know about this by this point, right? Like the next 10 years of our lives are going to be decisive for how the future looks like for younger generations. And as this community has experienced, those funders working towards gender rights, feminist movements, human rights, environmental rights, still have a lot to learn from themselves about how to do funding at these intersections differently. And also, most importantly, how to do them differently while working side by side with movements and with activists and grassroots leaders. And to me, that is the biggest challenge, but the biggest hope that lies within a community of funders like this collaboratory. We're calling it collaboratory because also we're experimenting here. We want this space to be a place where there's gender, feminist, climate, environmental activists, grassroots leaders, funders working side by side to grapple with questions around power, creating more horizontal decision-making structures where we actually share the power of how funding is done, where funding is directed. We want to keep on rooting our learning process all throughout about why a cross-siloed collaboration of funders doing environmental climate work would necessarily be needing to meet those gender feminist funders, right? And what happens when we break those silos, those conceptual silos in action. And ultimately, we want to redesign and offer a model of how philanthropy can work forwards by advocating for a different type of intersectional grant-making mechanism and practicing sharing governance with those who have been at the margins of power. And I would say that, I mean, this is not, it's not going to be an easy feat whatsoever. And I think to me, the most important and crucial aspect of this community right now is that we already acknowledge that there's going to be a need for grappling with questions around what power, who holds decisions on resources and why, and how do we move traditional philanthropy from that space to a space of like dismantling white supremacy in many ways, dismantling the traditional channels of wealth accumulation, and this funding space is different from traditional philanthropy or any other pool funding collaborations that we've seen, because we're just not moving resources, right? We're asking, we're trying to build governance with and alongside movements. And just to close and paraphrase a really amazing quote that I think resonates and has resonated with many of us over the past couple of years from Arundhati Roy, right at the onset of the pandemic. In order to build the world that we're dreaming, we need to make it happen, basically. And Arundhati Roy was saying how she can hear it breathing, how she can see that other world breathing. And I would say that, I mean, this funding community is going to be a case where we can actually practice what decolonizing wealth looks like, decentralization of power, intersectionality approaches look like with grant-making mechanism. And we're putting our best into investing in this space.
Thank you so much, Maria Alejandra. And these are indeed inspiring actions, because like you say, it has a lot of, and this was something that was touched with Pratima as well, how perhaps it's mostly an issue around access, because once you have access to the type of work that is making this imagined world that we want to live in a reality already, funders can have an experiential transformation. And maybe this is what needs to happen in order to democratize resources even more, and to make sure that traditional philanthropy shifts to what I consider, and we all do from this conversation probably, the most crucial intersection to solve the climate crisis, which is working on these ways to really address different compounding crises here. So I want to just turn one last time to Pratima to invite you, Pratima, to share what is your primary message that you would like to convey to this audience of donors today, and from your perspective, how can donors best partner with women and girls as change makers for climate action?
Thank you again for the question. So for me, I would say that we as a feminist environmental activist, we are looking for a paradigm shift. And what does that paradigm shift means for us? Is a grassroots organization, as a women, is a movement-based organization, also as a government, when we are in a decision making with the policies, laws, and legal framework in our country, and when we are as a funding for in this philanthropic world. So I look at from a very different perspective. So for us, it's for us jointly, collectively sitting down together. I think it's time for us to rethink and analyze and plan. Where has the money gone? What are the kind of policies that we have so far made at the national level? Have those commitments that the government have made, has those really changed the lives of the people within this 20 years? Where has the fund gone? And when it comes that way, where has the fund gone? Then we have to also look in a very disaggregated way. Has the fund gone to the women's movement, or the youth movement, or the disability, or the indigenous, or any kind of LGBTI or other marginalized groups? So for us, it's more looking at the structures, I would say. This time, the moment is about looking at those structures, trying to see about those power dynamics, and also looking at the hegemony that we have since very long time. And I think this is more about dismantling about this power. And when we say dismantling about this power, I would say even in the philanthropic world, we want is those marginalized groups represented in the power structures. It's not only receiving the money. When we talk about ourselves as an indigenous women with disabilities, that we are not passive recipients, we are contributors. We are supporting our family, we're supporting the society and the country that we live. So what does that mean? And when it comes to the whole philanthropic world, we also want to be in those power structures where we need to say that what does it mean when we talk about feminist agenda? When the feminist agenda is further debated, what does it look like when it comes to the disability justice rights initiatives, when it comes to the indigenous people's rights perspective? So I think those are the very critical things that we have to realize. But we still find that most of the organizations and most of the peoples are yet to bring those different layers of understanding the nature of the intersectionality, because itself it is complex and it differs to country context. So I would say that the lived experience, listening to those unheard voices, listening to those stories of the people, of the challenges, and also trying to reflect those challenges on the country context. I think those are very critical things that the philanthropic world and the funders has to realize. And if we really say that we really want to work in an environmental just human rights perspectives, then we really want the funders to work on intersectionality. And when they work on intersectionality, my urge is not to go with the numbers. For me, as an indigenous woman with disabilities, if I am going to make change in one person's lives, that also matters. That one is equal to 1,000 for me. And if the funders go for bringing changes of 1,000 or 5,000 people, that is not going to happen when it comes to the intersectional approach. So my urge is to understand these critical foundations of the intersectionality at the grassroots level, and also trying to bring those grassroots organization with the multi-year funding. So if you say that you're working in intersectionality and you only support for 3 years, that would not be justice from a philanthropic perspectives to me. So I think these are the very critical things that we have to realize, not only as a funders, but also as an activist, as a right holders, because to bring changes in people's lives takes time. And we are talking about the most marginalized group in a just and equitable manner, so that no one will be left behind. So if we are ensuring that no one will be left behind, I think these are the critical preconditions that we have to initiate. And when we say intersectional lens, this is the initiatives that we have to start from today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pratima. And I think that all of this reminds us that by leaving no one behind and by working on all the inequalities that are bringing us to the climate crisis would have been already solved if we had started from that. So it is a climate solution to work on the intersections and to work with grassroots movements around, and again, bringing them to the governance, like Maria Alejandra was already mentioning, and the democratization of resources actually includes that. So the call to move us away from traditional philanthropic spaces where there have been very hurtful silos in philanthropy that haven't allowed for Pratima's work, for example, or the type of work that Maria Alejandra was saying, to be supported, has been a huge missed opportunity in the philanthropic sector to really contribute to climate solutions. And we don't have a lot of time, so it is an urgent call that we're making here today. We also have a campaign that we're organizing together with with GAGA, our partners in funding gender justice and environmental work around the world. And this campaign is to mobilize $100 million for this intersection. And this is an attempt or an effort to bring those numbers that I mentioned around the funding landscape for this intersection, to bring them to a different place. And I think that this is a responsibility of all of us. And Pratima here today and Maria Alejandra were sharing with you all of the possibilities, all of the alternatives that we can do in the philanthropic sector to bring closer money to movements and meet them where they are. And this is where they are. Pratima was sharing her work, and Maria Alejandra was also sharing the many incredible insights and lessons learned from the Funders Learning community, but also her work in Frida and paying close attention to what young feminists are doing for climate justice solutions. So I want to just thank you all for allowing us to share these stories today, and hopefully this is the beginning of many conversations ahead. Thank you so much, Pratima, for joining us, and Maria Alejandra also for joining us, and I hope that that we are able to share a little bit of insights on what is this intersection really about? What are these intersections? And so that we can convince more and more funders to work in this and to support relationships and to support these type of movement approaches that we were talking about. So thank you so much, and we look forward to your questions.